Good morning. It's great to be with you again. If you were here last week, welcome back to our mini-series on Mary, the mother of Jesus. If you were not here last Tuesday, do not worry. I'm going to get you up to speed really quick. One of the main points that we addressed last week is that Mary is not someone that we think about very often outside of the Christmas story. The way that most of us deal with Mary on a regular basis is very similar to the way we deal with the nativity scene at our home. When Christmas is coming, we know it's time to get our nativity scene out. We take out all those figurines, we dust Mary off, we place her there, we look at her, we appreciate her role in the birth of Jesus, and once Christmas is over, off she goes back to the storage, and we don't really think about her the rest of the year. And I share two theories that I have of why this happens. And one of them is because many of us in the evangelical world, we just don't know what to do with Mary. We look at our Catholic brothers and sisters and we look at their intense devotion to Mary and we don't know what to do with it. And because we don't know what to do with it, we just don't know what to do with Mary altogether. So we keep her at an arm's length. The other reason why I think we don't have a very strong connection with Mary, or no connection whatsoever, is because of the way she's been historically portrayed and depicted throughout history. There's a particular picture that I showed last week, and we're going to show it again. I showed that picture last week, which helps us see some of the features that have been part of our imagination of Mary for thousands of years, where Mary is depicted for the most part as an extremely passive woman. She's somewhat stoic, like there's not a whole lot of emotion going on with her. Her head is always looking down, her eyes are looking down, her hands are put together. She has this perfect skin, and that one is cracked because it's a painting, but in every other picture that we see of her, perfect skin. And one of the problems with this depiction, I'm not saying it's wrong, but one of the problems with this imagination is that in our effort to highlight the purity of Mary and the sanctity of Mary, we've made her almost non-human. She's a little too perfect. She's almost like a lifeless statue. And since it's hard to see her as a human, then it's also hard for us to relate to her, to identify with her. And this is just one picture, but today I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures so that we can see the implications of having just one particular way of looking at Mary. And here are a few images that I found, and I want you to look at them. Here we can see all these traits that I just described in every single one of these images, whether we're talking about paintings or a stained glass like the upper left corner, or a mosaic piece of art on the upper right corner. They all show Mary in a very particular kind of way. It's almost like the same person. Not that Mary should be different people, but you know what I'm talking about. It's a very unique way of looking at her. Now, what else do you notice in these pictures? And feel free to yell out your answers. What else do all these pictures have in common? The color blue, that's right. In all of them, Mary is wearing blue. And this tradition of depicting Mary in blue started around the year 500 during the Byzantine period. The color blue was associated with purity, and it represents the sky in this like celestial kind of way, as Mary is sometimes seen. It was also associated with Byzantine royalty, and there's some connections in the Hebrew Bible as well with blue. And Mary, she was seen as this type of empress, this royal heavenly figure during the Byzantine period, very pure, and so that's how they envisioned her. And this particular tradition of dressing Mary in blue really took hold, like big time in artists' minds. It got so much traction that it became the ultimate way of depicting Mary accurately. Basically to this day, but especially from the 1500s to like the 1800s, all of the Middle Ages, that's like thousands of years. where this just got ingrained in people's minds. Mary wears blue. And we see this influence across the board, whether we're talking about like Baroque art, look at all those pictures, or Renaissance art, super similar. Or if we're looking at the Eastern Orthodox depictions, we have the Greek icons. A few of those pictures are from medieval times. Also, all of them are very, very similar. And even the more modern depictions of Mary that are more kind of like the Catholic, more modern understanding of Mary, where she's this heavenly protector. In all of those depictions from all around the world, Mary is wearing blue. Now, whether you are fans of this type of art or not, it doesn't really matter. Maybe you're like, I don't even like that. It's okay. It doesn't really matter. Because the truth is that this particular way of depicting Mary has been engraved in our psyche, whether we like it or not. For thousands of years, this is how we've seen Mary as humans in our humanity. So it's been engraved in our psyche individually and collectively. And there's great power in that. And perhaps you've never paid attention to the fact that she's, for the most part, wearing blue. Maybe you never took notice of that, or your brain has stored that information. That image has been stored in our mind, and it's so pervasive that whenever we see a depiction of Mary where she's not wearing blue, something feels off. Slightly off. She's not what we're used to. When we first look at that painting, when I looked at it, like the first thing you say is not, oh yeah, that's Mary. When I found this online in my extensive research, when I looked at her, I was like, I wonder who that lady is. I mean, there's angelic beings around her, there's a little baby. I wonder if it's Elizabeth. That's honestly what I thought. But I didn't go straight to Mary. Now, the other versions of Mary that I just showed, there's no doubt that's Mary. We know it's Mary. No one can deny that. But the red Mary? With the red Mary, we're a little bit more cautious, a little bit more suspicious, because she doesn't quite fit our imagination or our expectation of her. And the same happens with our theology, with our own theological patterns and biases and ways of looking at the world. When something does not match our expectation, something feels off, slightly off, or very off. And so we're cautious or even suspicious, right? This is especially true when it comes to Mary. We have this very specific way of looking at her, where we tend to highlight mainly two aspects of her. And these are connected to the Christmas story. That is what we hyper-highlight. The first aspect that we tend to highlight is the state of her body, right? The fact that she was a virgin. And we've equated the purity of Mary and the sainthood of Mary to the state of her body, which has resulted in a hyper-focus and a hyper-vigilance of the female body to this day, in a way that doesn't happen with the male body, because it comes from our understanding of Mary and what we value in Mary. The other aspect we tend to highlight a lot, and I'm not saying it's wrong, hear me well on this one, I'm not saying it's wrong, but the other aspect that we tend to highlight is her role in the birth of Jesus Christ. Is it a huge role? Absolutely. Is it important? Absolutely. Should we celebrate it? Absolutely. But what about the rest of her life? What about the rest of her story? Her lifelong commitment to not just having this son, but raising this son, protecting this son, witnessing all that happened to this son, which there's no doubt involved sacrifice and courage and suffering and pain. Can you imagine the range of emotions she might have experienced throughout her lifetime as the mother of Christ? Can you imagine that? I certainly do not imagine a figure that doesn't move and just looks down. She went through so much. She felt so much. She experienced so much. She risked so much. And I hope we can see that. One of the main goals of this mini-series, as I like to call it, even though it's just 2 sermons, is to get us to appreciate Mary beyond the Christmas story, beyond the birth narrative, beyond the traditional depictions and understandings we have of her, which are not necessarily wrong, but they're limited. They're narrow. To a degree, they're biased. And most importantly for me, they're borrowed. They did not originate in this culture, not mine or yours. It's someone else's understanding of Mary. And so what I want us to be able to see is the Mary in red, the Mary in green, in yellow, in black, in brown. Do you know where I'm getting at? We want to be able to see the full extent of her humanity. We want to be able to see her laughing, out loud, laughing, smiling, rejoicing, crying, getting angry, experiencing pain, all of which she went through, for sure. She was a human. And the thing is, we do have all those stories. We have all of them that show us all these different sides of Mary. Like the time when she went to visit her cousin Elizabeth. As soon as they saw each other, I'm sure they embraced each other and they rejoiced. And Elizabeth was so happy that she said in a loud voice, the Bible says, she said in a loud voice, "Blessed are you. As soon as I heard your voice, the baby inside of me leaped with joy." That must have been one of the most joyful and exciting moments in the life of Mary. I cannot imagine it not being so. And now just through this one other story, we begin to see a different side of Mary already. Just a slightly different angle, or a very different angle. Can you imagine all the moments of joy that she must have had with Jesus? Try to imagine that. Can you picture her hearing Jesus say his first words? Just imagine that, looking at him, and he's saying Abba or something. And she's like, oh my God. Can you picture that? Can you imagine her holding his little hands, just teaching him how to walk, helping him with his first steps, and smiling? Can you see that? Can you imagine her playing with Jesus? Playing in the front porch or whatever they had. Try to see that. You might be thinking that I'm kind of pushing this too much or messing around, but this is the playful one is particularly important, to be able to see Mary that way. There was this time in my life when being able to see the playful side of my own mother completely changed the way I looked at her for the rest of my life. All my life growing up, my mother was this daunting figure. She was so strict, always keeping tabs of my behavior. She was almost stoic. I didn't see her laugh a whole lot. She's different now. But it was brutal. She was always very put together, always. So that was the image that I had of her for years, until she became a grandmother. Have you noticed what happens to parents when they go from parents to grandparents? It's crazy. It's like a kid that was inside of them suddenly comes out and they just go nuts. And that happened with my mom. One day, I got to my house, their house, I was still living with them. I got to the house and I could hear that my mom was there playing with my niece, her granddaughter. I could hear them clearly. They were playing in the kitchen. And I went to the kitchen and I could not see them, but I could hear them, and I was thinking, what is going on? Where are they? And it was a really big kitchen, and it had this massive, what is the name, island? Like a massive table in the middle, really big and really tall. So I just went around it, and then I saw my mom on the floor, like all of her, the entirety of her on the floor, playing with my niece, pretending to be an elephant. And my mom was like that. And I saw that, and I was like, oh, Mother. And she just went, what? Like that. And I was like, what is going on? And she was laughing, and I had never seen that side of her. Ever, ever, ever. And from that moment on, I was able to see this other side of my mom that was full of life and joy and a little bit more human. And it allowed me to relate to her just a little more. And when we can see those other sides of Mary, the sides that are a little bit more human, they help us relate to her just a little more. And as we all know, not everything was joy and laughter with Mary. In fact, most of her life involved deep, deep suffering and worrying and pain and struggle. And she knew that going in, right? This was already like a very interesting pregnancy. She knew the whole world would be against her. It was difficult right from the beginning. But then it got prophesied over her. Shortly after Jesus was born, when they brought Jesus to the temple, as it was the custom according to the law, there was an old man in the temple. Do you remember his name? Someone? Yes? No? Starts with S? Yes. Simeon. He was there, and he was full of the Holy Spirit, and he was told that he was not going to see death until he saw the Savior in the flesh. He was very old. So when Joseph and Mary show up with baby Jesus, and he sees him, he's overjoyed. And he holds Jesus in his arms, and he says, "Today I've seen your salvation." And then he prophesies over Jesus, and he tells his parents that this child is going to cause many to rise and many to fall. And then he looks at Mary in the eyes, and he says, "And a sword will pierce your soul." And that was his way of letting her know that her life as the mother of Christ would be painful. And that's why a lot of depictions of Mary show her with swords in her heart. That's why it's coming straight from this passage. And this is a red Mary, by the way, so we're already getting a little bit used to that. There's another moment connected to the temple, to a visit to the temple, that caused all sorts of havoc in Mary's heart. And it happened when Jesus was 12 years old. When they left the temple, remember they went to the temple, and then when they left, both Mary and Joseph, they assumed that Jesus was with them, but he wasn't. And he didn't realize that. They didn't realize this for 3 days. We're not going to judge them, but 3 days. They lost the Son of God for 3 days and didn't even know it. And when they found out, can you imagine Mary's pain? Have you ever seen a parent lose their child at a theme park or a fair? Have you seen the horror in their face, the panic, the dread? My parents lost me when I was 6. And I remember having seen her face when she finally saw me. It must have been horrible. It must have been horrible for Mary. And when they went back to the temple to see if he was there, and when they saw them, you would think that she would go, "Oh my goodness, thank you." She was so mad. She was so mad at him. She said, "Why have you done this to us? We've been looking for you everywhere." She remembered, Middle Eastern woman, okay, very similar to Mexican women. I picture her doing that. "Why are you doing this to us? We're looking everywhere, here, yeah, yeah, yeah." Now, if the Mother of God was able to lose sight of Jesus, how much more grace there is for us when we lose sight of Jesus. This human Mary allows me to experience the grace of God just a little more. Now, what about the time when they had to flee to Egypt? Remember that story? When Herod heard about the birth of Jesus, he got so jealous and he ordered every kid, every boy, 2 years and under, to be killed. So Joseph and Mary had to flee to a foreign land to seek asylum so they could escape persecution. much like what families in today's world have to do to escape persecution and violence and hunger. And I really like the contextualization of that second picture. Were Mary and Joseph Latinos crossing the border? Absolutely not. They were not. But their story is such a human story and so close to the realities of so many people around the world that they can see themselves in Joseph and Mary's story. Do you see how much room there is for relatability when we see them in all their humanity? There are two other stories that I want to highlight before we go. I don't even know what time it is. The next one is the interaction between Mary and Jesus at the wedding of Cana. You remember that story too, right? The family, whoever's running the party, they run out of wine, which was a big no-no in their culture. And Mary takes it upon herself to fix this problem. And she basically commands Jesus. She goes to him and she tells him that he needs to fix this, make wine. God knows how, just take care of it. And what does Jesus say to her? Woman, it is not my time. He says no at first. And she doesn't care. She completely ignores him and says, you, and you to the servants. You do whatever he tells you. See you later. And I feel like we miss this very interesting interaction between them because Mary exerted such authority over Jesus. And Jesus complied because she was his mother. He still lived within that culture. And it's virtually most cultures around the world. You listen to your mother. Hi, where am I? Here we go. So this picture, I really like this one too. I mean, I like every picture I'm showing you. There's a reason why I'm showing you these pictures. But I like it because, first of all, it's very colorful, and I like that. But you see the guests at the top, they're eating, they're dancing, they're having a blast, and then down here we see the scene where everybody's looking at Jesus. Jesus is the main figure in white and like blue or a greenish color. And they're looking at him, what's he gonna do? What's he gonna do? And he's giving him instructions. But then you see Mary, smaller than Jesus, kind of slightly behind him on the side, but she's kind of the one directing this operation. It's really cool. And then you see the servant doing what Jesus, via his mother, wanted him to do. And this second depiction that I have from Heki, I'm sure many of you here are familiar with Heki. There's a big picture at Spill office of him. I really like this one because we see the guests at the top, they're chatting, they're almost unaware that they're running out of wine. Their cups are empty. There's no wine in their cups. So they don't realize that, but there's this figure in the background, this woman in red, almost like a mysterious woman. She notices that their wine is running out. And then down below, we have Jesus giving the instruction to the servants. It's a very cool depiction, also very colorful. Now, aren't all these depictions from around the world kind of fun? They're very insightful. They're very different. They're very colorful. And together, all of these depictions, including all the traditional depictions, all of them together, they reflect the theological imagination of people from all around the world. And there is so much beauty in that. That is so sacred. Now on to the last event that I want to highlight, which is the event of events. The moment that Simeon foretold Mary when Jesus was just a little boy, when he let her know that his pain would be her pain and that it would pierce her soul. We all have very vivid images of what we know as the Passion of Christ, right? We've all at some point imagined that, whether because we watched a movie or when we hear messages during Easter. We've all seen Jesus being pushed around. We've seen him in our heads carrying his cross, getting that thorn crown with blood coming down his face. We've seen the lashes in his back. We've seen this horror story in our heads, all of us. Now I want you to add one more element to that vision. Now picture Mary watching all of this, witnessing this horrific thing that was happening to her son. Because we know that she was there. She was there. There is one line in the Gospel of John, just one line, that is enough for us to imagine not just her there witnessing this, but the depth of her pain and the horror that she must have felt. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother. That's all it says. But that's all we need to imagine what this must have been like. Mary witnessing the death of her son, whom she had brought into this world, whom she had raised and loved and played with and protected until she could no longer do it. Look at her. This is a way more human Mary who suffered and who gave so much. And we don't give her credit for most any of it. Do you know what Mary shows me? Me, Gaby, this is just a personal insight. What Mary shows me as I look at her whole life, and when I look at this moment, when she witnessed the death of Jesus Christ and the Son, she shows me the human side of the greatest story of love ever told, where a father did not withhold his son and co-suffered with them at the cross for the sake of the world. Only in this story, there was also a mother. There was also a mother who did not withhold her only son, her first son, not her only son, and co-suffered with him at the cross for the sake of the world. I think that Mary is someone who deserves not just our admiration and our respect, but even our devotion. She was a multifaceted, wonderful, amazing, brave woman who was a warrior and a protector and a mother who had love and authority, but also flaws and playfulness and perhaps a bad temper every now and then. And that makes her so relatable. And suddenly we can close that gap between us and Mary that has been so big, so wide, and so long. We can finally close it. And we can see the humanity of her. And those of us who can see the humanity of her story can also see her story in our humanity from every corner of the world. Do you see that? That's the only question I have for you today. Do you see that? Do you see her? And do you see God in her? I see a lot of nods. So I consider this sermon a success. Let's pray.